Okay. All right. Hey, thank you very much. Over to the first panel.
I think I'm up here, Jonathan. So
Todd, you are, and let me just say, we've had a long-standing partnership with Todd Sloat, and Todd probably needs no introduction, but based in the Southern Cascades and lots of work actually throughout the Cascades, Sierra, and beyond. As a watershed wildlife guy, he does way more than that in terms of been fundamental or foundational in the Bernie Hack Creek Community Forest and watershed group. And Todd, thanks for your long time partnership. Take it away, please.
Well, thanks, Jonathan, for the invite and the inclusion in the Sierra Institute's continued leadership and keeping scale going. And I also know that means funding from a variety of partners throughout time in this process, whether it's the Forest Service, SNC, or DOC. I've kind of lost track of who all has pitched in at times to help keep this momentum going, and obviously everybody attending today. There's some incredible amount of knowledge out there with folks doing really complex work in a variety of settings. Fella asked me to just give a quick blurb on what I thought going to scale was for our region, and then we'll turn it over to some presentations. Like some, but unlike others, our region is our collaborative is about a 300,000 acre geography. Most of that is forested. About half of that is forested and managed by the feds, and the majority of that is by U.S. Forest Service. The rest is BLM and Park Service. Going to scale for us means really assisting partners develop the capacity they need to get the work that they want to do in their respective geographies and ownerships. It also means addressing bottlenecks that those partners have. Some of those are unique to them, some of those are different. And whether that's the fire safe councils, the tribes, private industrial timber landowners, everybody has unique challenges. And our collaborative really works on trying to help resolve those in some fashion, whether that's strategic planning, assessment, monitoring, reporting, outreach, education. An end state that made me think of, I do a lot of stream and meadow restoration. There's a term called dynamic equilibrium, if you're a geomorphologist or heard that term before. I like to think of that in the forest arena as well, and it basically in the context that the systems that we live in can adapt to kind of major changes, whether that's an ignition from a fire, whether that's rising diesel costs, but somehow the systems locally, are able to be maintained without too much heartache or heartburn. And unfortunately, as we know, there's been some real heartache and heartburn from catastrophic wildfires. So these collaboratives that live in areas that are susceptible to burning have incredible challenges, as Jonathan mentioned, particularly with things like the supply chain with existing infrastructure, because those are millions of dollar investments, complex permitting and challenges, and then they're linked to everything from the planning phase to developing the project. So I think if our group was to say, what does the going to scale mean, we would land on something like participation in forest-wide NEPA, that is partners helping assist the Forest Service write the NEPA and implement it. It would mean finding new ways to fund the highly expensive work in the WUI areas, in the small landowner parcels, whether that's through philanthropy funds, voluntary carbon credits, or beneficiaries participating. So I think that's would adequately summarize what going to scale means for the Bernie Hack Creek group. And I'm sure others would have things to add, but I get to be the moderator today. So there's probably might be a few. It's hard. It's a little intimidating seeing 3 screens of faces and context. It's hard to see who's on the screen. But with that, I want to turn it over to our presenters. As Isabella said, we'll hold questions till the very end. It will probably be a challenge when you raise your hand for me to find you quickly, but to pass along. So please be patient on that end. But we're going to start off with Karen, I believe, unless I'm told otherwise, to present today. So thank you so much, Karen, Heather, and Susanna for presenting today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Todd. Can everyone see my screen? Great, thank you. Todd, I love the reference to dynamic equilibrium. Great term for resilience in my mind. And I want to really thank Jonathan, Bella, Zach, and the rest of the team at the Sierra Institute for your ongoing leadership, mentorship, and for putting on this great event today. So I'm going to talk about building and sustaining impact in terms of a regional integrated portfolio of projects and initiatives at the North Coast scale to support healthy watersheds and thriving communities. I'll talk a little bit for those of you who are not familiar, and I do see a lot of familiar and wonderful faces on the call today, about the background of the North Coast Resource Partnership as well as the region, and then really focus in on how we've been building a long-term sustainable and positive impact through this portfolio of projects and initiatives by evaluating and prioritizing, developing projects, then implementing them through partners, focusing on capacity enhancement, as Jonathan referenced, and then ongoing adaptive programmatic refinement. And then Bella suggested we talk about some barriers and challenges, which I also like to think of as opportunities. So the North Coast Resource Partnership region, as we define it, is the tribal lands, as well as all or part of the 7 North Coast counties that you see depicted here. And it's a source region for carbon, water, and biodiversity. And it is not well connected by built infrastructure, but has lots of intact natural capital. And it is home to over 35 federally recognized tribes and many non-federally recognized tribes. It's a region with very diverse socio-political viewpoints and socioeconomic status, and it's got about 50% of the population living under the poverty line. And the partnership itself was convened in 2005, and its mission really is to ensure thriving communities and landscapes in the region. It is an integrated multi-objective framework, so focuses on all sorts of different things that are stacking, as benefits for achieving thriving communities and landscapes. It's governed by a leadership council of appointees from the region's tribes and counties. And it also is supported by a technical committee and staff, also appointed by tribes and counties. It's held together by a non-binding memorandum of mutual understandings, which just outlines the principles and ensures that everybody is in alignment about those principles, goals, and objectives. And then a policy handbook ensures transparency so that everybody can understand how the NCRP works and how it allocates funding, et cetera, and makes decisions. There's been a kind of a long-term focus on equity, transparency, inclusion, shared vision, and common ground, recognizing that there's a lot of diversity out there, but there's a lot of things that we can agree upon. It's guided in terms of prioritization by both Western and tribal science, and there's a very strong emphasis on synchronizing the priorities of tribes, the federal, state government, as well as local priorities. And to date, we've brought in about $120 million for this economically disadvantaged region. And our ratio of planning to implementation is roughly 10 to 90. And of course, that shifts all the time. A really strong emphasis on the effective use of public funds and a lot of reporting on return on investment of public investments and private foundation investments. So how are we focusing on getting to scale in terms of this landscape portfolio of projects and strategies? Well, one of the ways that we do that is by convening everybody in the region to develop a shared vision. And so this vision plan, and some of the people on the call today were involved in helping us develop this, reflects about 3 years of effort doing very deep and ongoing outreach to about 500 entities in the North Coast region to help develop a list and prioritize that list of strategies and projects to guide the work of the North Coast Resource Partnership. And so I won't go into a lot of detail right now, but I would invite you to take a look at this on our website, and I'll link it at the end and drop it in the chat if I have time. But there's about close to 45 or 50 strategies that range from prescribed fire to thinning to capacity enhancement to changing procurement policies, et cetera. And then a lot of information about how we prioritize projects, and we're already moving this plan into implementation in a big way. And there's also a list of demonstration projects which are intended through partners to test bed innovations that can move the needle and help us get to scope and scale more quickly. So underlying the prioritization process in this plan, and one of the things that has really helped us move to scale in terms of a landscape portfolio of projects and initiatives is this adaptive planning and prioritization framework. And this is described in detail in the vision plan. And it utilizes regional assessments and spatial analysis and modeling at the scale of the whole North Coast region. So 12% of California, no small task, using LiDAR and things like that to understand objectively what's going on biophysically and socioeconomically on the landscape, and then integrates that with local knowledge, including indigenous science, TEK, and other forms of local expertise. So taking the regional objective remote sensing or other regional data and integrating it with the brain trust that's on the ground doing the work, and getting that 1 + 1 = 10 effect from that. And then that is what's driving the identification of strategic actions and projects in our portfolio. Those are then prioritized, evaluated, and selected using a very rigorous process, which is described on that website. I don't have time to go into it. Ongoing collaborative and multi-objective plan development, working with our constituents and partners in the region. And then underlaying all of our project development is this idea that we want all boats to rise with the tide, and we want there to be an even playing field. So there's a very strong emphasis, which I'll talk about further in a moment, on technical assistance and capacity investments to make sure that everybody can participate. And then we move into plan and project implementation, which we are very much in all the time. And then reporting on performance and metrics and using that information to then drive this adaptive process. All of this is underlain by tribal and county decision-making through our leadership council, and I like to call it democracy at its finest. So some of the regional remote sensing data that we take into account when planning are things obviously true for all of us, like fire history and some of the trends in high intensity, mega fires over the last 20 years, for example, and how that impacts our thinking about priorities on the landscape. Also things like, in addition to biodiversity mapping at the regional scale or looking at ecosystem function, things like carbon stocks and where is the above ground biomass, where is it likely to be emitted in a fire, causing even more problems in terms of, climate change. And then also, in addition to those biophysical aspects, where are there communities at risk, and how do we kind of objectively at the regional scale look at where priorities maybe need to be emphasized for areas that are either socially vulnerable or likely to experience some sort of extreme event that has a very negative outcome. So again, these are screening level tools. They're not the kind of black box decider of what's going to happen, but they are one factor in our prioritization of the landscape scale portfolio of projects and initiatives. And then the way that those come together. So on the left here, we have LiDAR data from Sonoma County from a few years ago, but we've just recently partnered with USGS to fill in the gaps for the whole North Coast region. So in this case, you can see building footprints in yellow, roads in white, and then the pixels that are white are areas of heavy fuel loading, and in black are less heavy fuel loading. So you can see at the regional scale how this level of high resolution data gives us incredible information about prioritizing, ingress and egress routes, actions in the WUI, emergency evacuation, but also where should we be focusing our efforts on prescribed fire or thinning or education of the community. And then those data are then integrated with or married with local knowledge, like you see on the right. This is a tribal pods workshop that was held in the region, where that brain trust is really taking the screening level data and bringing it to ground, and also in some cases correcting it if it's wrong. In addition to that prioritizing work that we do to develop the list of projects, we track projects. And this work is very strongly aligned with the Interagency Project Tracker, as well as CalMapper and some of the Forest Service and other CAL FIRE work that is being done to track projects. So we intentionally align with that work, but this is kind of more higher resolution. And these data are everything from, is the project conceptual? Is it in the planning phase? Is it implementation? Is it finished and being monitored? And then we're able to slice and dice and filter through a whole variety of questions, whether it's geography or who's the project proponent, or is it tribally led, or is it in an economically disadvantaged area? And then we have a whole series of performance metrics that are, again, strongly aligned with state and federal standards for performance and can feed into those other tools. And then I might say that one of the projects that we have going on right now is a pilot with CAL FIRE to test the connection between the vision plan, which was funded by the Department of Conservation Regional Forest and Fire Capacity Program, and then connecting that explicitly with CAL FIRE's Forest Health Program. So we're in the process of developing and prioritizing some large landscape scale projects that will carry out the CAL FIRE objectives through the NCRP kind of filter at the regional scale. As I mentioned, we have a lot of emphasis on capacity investments, and one of the strategies in the vision plan is to enhance year-round, local, long-term, multi-objective capacity so that we have more local leadership in capacity and in carrying out the activities that need to happen in the region. And so, for example, we do a lot of assessments. We recently did a pretty quantitative assessment with the Humboldt Area Foundation looking at the capacity needs of tribal and rural fire departments, and that is now rolling into implementation of several $100,000 in responding to those needs identified in those assessments. We also have an ongoing, very robust technical assistance program that matches expert consultants with local project sponsors who need help with things like CEQA or NEPA, or they need an RPF, or they need spatial analysis work, et cetera. And then we're in the process of developing, again, with the Regional Forest and Fire Capacity Program team, a whole strategy around equipment, trainings, sub-grants. And then we've had a long-term emphasis on building toolboxes so that entities can share resources across the region. So ongoing emphasis on adaptively and continuously improving our programs so that we're hopefully being more effective at this landscape scale portfolio of projects. And so that means really emphasizing the performance metrics phase. We take that very seriously and we evaluate those and ask, what are we missing, or how could we be more impactful? We also have a strong emphasis on community and partner input. So for example, when we do an RFP, we reach out typically to the local project sponsors who participated and ask them, like, how did that go for you? And what would you suggest in terms of making this more accessible or effective or user-friendly? And all of this, as I mentioned, is in service of continuous improvement because, we've had our share of missteps like all of us over the years and want to learn from those errors and correct them. So I was asked to speak about some barriers or challenges and opportunities. I think, as we all know, just the expanding magnitude of the challenges, whether those are wildfire, like I showed in the slide previously, or other extreme events from climate change, it's hard to move ahead and build capacity and build a regional portfolio when the problems keep getting bigger. There's also legacy issues, and it's really important to acknowledge those, including genocide and racism that have affected communities and continue to affect them and need to be daylighted, but also legacy issues having to do with how landscapes are managed, whether that's preventing tribes from managing landscapes as they have for millennia, or just new learning about how we should be managing our landscapes more effectively to be resilient and get dynamic equilibrium back, as Todd said. And then a history of not leveraging adequately local leadership and expertise. And that's obviously changing. And I think our partnership is really pushing the envelope on that. But there's still more to be done there to really look at local leadership and stewardship as just as valuable as our incredibly valuable state and federal partnerships. And then finally, we hear this over and over and over from our tribes and RCDs, NGOs, all of our partners, about the volatility of funding and how extremely damaging that is to capacity and to success over time. This is my really silly graph that I made, but this is kind of how I look at it, which is that you have these crash and burn cycles of 3 to 5 years of funding where organizations spin up and they build all this capacity and they get really good at what they're doing, and then they crash down because the funding goes away. And I know John Amadeo is on the call and he has some really creative thinking about this, but how do we get at a momentum approach rather than a volatility approach and stop kind of having these poor ROI outcomes in terms of resources, money, loss of data, loss of effectiveness and credibility. And then moving forward, the NCRP is really interested, for ourselves, but also in partnership with others throughout the state and the nation on active partnership to build collaborative infrastructure, to develop shared priorities, effectively implement those priorities, because we're really interested in that bright blue line between planning and implementation, and then to sustain that momentum and resilience over time. So with that, I'll stop. Here's some contact for the website and the vision plan on the bottom. And if needed, I can put those in the chat as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Karen. Susie, I think you're next up, or I don't know if we went with the lineup or not, but if not, feel free to pass it on. So.
Okay, great. Let me see. All right, this full screen.
While we're pulling that up, Karen, I'm always amazed and a little bit intimidated by the size of the geography of the North Coast Resource Partnership. I mentioned ours was 300,000 acres. It looks like yours is somewhere around 13 to 23 million acres or so.
Okay. Are you able to see this okay, or is it showing in like a note format?
I'm seeing it in
Showing
a note format,
Okay,
I
let me
don't
try one
know.
more time.
but I see like the next slide option.
Okay, let me try one more time. Maybe I'll try this PDF version then. Okay, sorry about that. Let's see. All right, is that working?
Perfect.
That's great.
Okay, cool. Thanks, guys. All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining today. I'm Susie Kirshner, and I'm the Conservation Programs Manager at the Inland Empire Resource Conservation District down in Southern California. And a little bit just about our organization. So our RCD is part of a network of 90 plus RCDs in the state of California. We are a local government agency, and our mission is focused on preserving and protecting natural resources. And we do this both by working with private landowners and public agencies, so we can work across all land types. Our RCD covers 1,300 square miles in San Bernardino and Riverside counties. And that's mostly the San Bernardino Mountains that we're working in, and we share that with Mojave Desert RCD to our north. And we have a team of 30 staff that carry out programs in habitat restoration, sustainable agriculture, where we work a lot with local farmers on their conservation practices, forestry and fire prevention, and K through 12 education. And are you seeing my slides advance okay? Okay, good. So I wanted to share today a little bit about how we've been going to scale in our region, both as our RCD and across the San Bernardino Mountains, and also some of the barriers we've had to getting to scale, which we have plenty to share. But some of the opportunities and ways we have been increasing capacity. The first one I wanted to share was through the Regional Forest and Fire Capacity Program, which I think has already been mentioned a few times this morning. And this is a state-funded program that has made regional block grant investments into different regions throughout California. We're shown in this map here in this small blue area, and it has really allowed our organization to increase capacity, but also 12 to 20 partners in our region that we partner with closely, so that we're ensuring we're increasing capacity across the region. And through this program, we're working both with the statewide agencies and with the task force to coordinate locally between what's going on at the state and making sure that's getting translated to the local regions. We're also coordinating regionally across Southern California with the other grantees. And then, locally in the San Bernardino Mountains, we're working to prioritize and develop projects, focusing a lot on CEQA and NEPA, especially trying to get to scale with bigger NEPA projects, looking more forest-wide. helping remove roadblocks, increasing workforce development opportunities, and then just generally increasing regional capacity, including staffing and needs to just have folks out there getting the work done. And the program is mostly focused on the planning and capacity piece so that we can get more into the implementation side through other funding sources. And one of the efforts that we've been working on through the RFFC program that again has been helping increase our scale is the development of the Headwaters Resiliency Partnership. So this is a multi-agency collaborative. We've been working together for the past couple of years. And these logos down here show some of the partners involved, but there's many others. And we're working together to identify project goals, to develop strong project plans and analyses. A lot of the landscape we're looking at is Forest Service lands. About 80% of our forest is federally owned. So we are emphasizing work in those areas, but then also looking for those opportunities to treat and plan for private lands also in the mix. We are also working to identify funding sources and financial planning for these larger projects. So bringing all of our technical and financial resources together to support projects. Executing contracts, helping contract out NEPA, CEQA, all these planning processes that take a lot of work. Some of the benefits of our RCD, the local water district we work with, is we have a lot more flexibility in terms of our contracting, our hiring processes. So we're trying to incorporate those tools into this partnership to help move things forward more quickly. And then also working to share a common message and advocate for our region's needs. This picture down here on the right is a meeting we had with Senator Ochoa Bo, and we're really just trying to voice what is going on in the San Bernardino Mountains, the efforts that are taking place, and what we need to continue scaling up. Another thing we've been doing at the IRCD to scale up is just bringing on more people to really make sure that we have the capacity to meet the needs of the region. And so we hire employees that both support IRCD's mission, but also the partners. So right now we have 2 project managers who focus on grant writing, management, and contracting projects. A forester who's working towards his registered professional forester's license, a forest ecologist, and more recently we brought on an outreach specialist to make sure we're messaging to the community and to our electeds and others that need to hear kind of what's going on in the mountains down here. And then we also hire on average 3 to 5 seasonal staff each year that support different agencies. So again, they're on IRCD's payroll, but oftentimes we'll be hiring maybe a botany assistant or a cultural resources monitor to support the Forest Service for the season to make sure we're moving forward these large scale projects. So those are some of the kind of things we've been working on to get to scale. And then I wanted to share also a few of our barriers. And I was kind of thinking of these in a few different pools. So I think one of them is just personnel in general. You know, these projects take a lot of time meeting, collaborating, you know, bringing resources together, understanding each other's needs. So we do have challenges with staff and partner turnover, moving to different agencies, moving to different roles. But even more so than that, also just shifting priorities during the work year. You know, a lot of times our Forest Service and CAL FIRE partners get pulled off for fires and other emergencies that are, you know, more pressing than planning a project. And so again, with the Headwaters Resiliency Partnership, we're hoping that the partners that aren't, you know, responsible for responding to these emergencies can continue momentum while our partners are doing that important work. On the planning side, we have challenges with CEQA and NEPA and just moving the process forward. We have a lot of eyes on projects in the San Bernardino Mountains. It's a highly recreated forest. A lot of people live here in this community. So oftentimes NEPA takes quite some time, a lot of public comment, oftentimes litigation. So with that comes a greater need for engagement and outreach and ensuring that communities and interest groups are being brought along the whole time planning is occurring, so we can kind of come together on, you know, priorities and understanding of why we're moving forward these implementation practices. For funding, just long-term funding investments, if we're talking about going to scale and building out larger projects, we're needing to think about how to fund these larger projects. So just continued funding and then looking at project financing opportunities too. And then lastly, on the implementation side, in Southern California, there's just a, lack of real industry to treat. There's not really any timber operations. There's not a lot of biomass facilities. So we're oftentimes stuck just treating the landscape right there on the mountains. It's hard to pull things off. So that's a challenge, as well as just local crews and investment in workforce to perform fuel reduction work in our local mountains. So that is also something that we are working to address through increased crew capacity development locally. So that's all I wanted to share, and here's my email if anyone wants to reach out afterwards, and otherwise we can have questions at the end of the panel.
Thank you, Susie. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Awesome. And then staying in the southern part of the state with Heather Marlowe from San Diego RCD.
Hello. Bella's going to be advancing my slides for me, so bear with me as I communicate with her.
Zach, do you want to share? Or do you have them up? Or should I grab them?
Yeah, I don't mind doing that. Just give me 1 sec.
For those of us up north or in the cold environment, Heather, what's the temperature today?
Let's see, it's currently 61. And we're expecting a drop tomorrow. We got a storm coming in, so a little bit of sunshine this week.
And Heather, you can see the slides?
Yeah, looks great. Thank you.
Cool. Just let me know when to advance.
Okay, great, thanks. Okay, good morning. My name is Heather Marlowe. I serve as the Forest Health and Fire Prevention Program Director at the RCD of Greater San Diego County. I've served the organization for about 5 years. I look forward to participating in this learning opportunity with you today. I'm new to this group, so I'm going to start off with sharing a little bit about the scale that my team currently works at and how we got our program here, as well as some of the challenges that we face. Could you go to the next slide, please? Okay, so our service area is illustrated in this map of San Diego County in orange, and you'll see that it encompasses the majority of San Diego County, which is a fairly large service area, definitely not compared to some of the others we just talked about, but I was feeling like it was large. It's also diverse in many different ways. I put a couple pictures here on the left. So on the top, that's our Mission Bay, really iconic landscape. And then our service area goes all the way east to the deserts, actually. But this is one of our mountain communities at Cuyamaca Lake. Could you go to the next slide, please? Okay, so I wanted to talk to you about Fire Safe Council because for many, many years, one of the ways that we consistently served the region was through wildfire prevention and preparedness programs. We've done this through the Fire Safe Council of San Diego County since 1997. The Fire Safe Council is unique in that it's a 501c3 nonprofit, but it also serves as an umbrella organization to support volunteers, formation and activities of community fire safe councils in neighborhoods throughout the region. There's currently 37 of these community fire safe councils, and you can see the mosaic of how they're distributed on the map here. We manage the Fire Safe Council as staff of the RCD in partnership with our local, state, and federal fire agency partner representatives. Each community fire safe council group has their own dedicated volunteers who serve as a board of directors. They sometimes have their own bylaws and achieve nonprofit status of their own, but we support them with conducting local outreach and education, community programs, fundraising to create and update their own CWPP documents. In addition to that, we have longstanding programs that administer homeowner assistance with creating and maintaining defensible space. Could you go to the next slide, please? So here's some photos of the activities that these groups engage in. It's a strong network of agency partners and community members on the ground working together. And that's been a really foundational part of our success for collaborative efforts, is these individual connections. But this also does pose a challenge because in managing this very important work, the impact is often parcel to parcel, or rather a mosaic of parcels peppered throughout communities, when our goal is really community protection. So we of course want to implement larger scale projects that have project continuity and can better protect communities from wildfire, but also potentially protect our sensitive landscapes from people and ignitions as well. Could you go to the next slide, please? Okay, so for my team, we started to have a shift in the scale of our projects in 2019. We had a group of landowners and land managers in our Palomar Mountain area in the north part of the county that participated in developing a project that we call Saving San Diego's Last Mixed Conifer Forest. Funding through a CAL FIRE Forest Health grant made this possible. And it's a collaborative approach to manage and protect the health of our montane forest and watersheds, among many other co-benefits. So we have 5 partners dedicated to this project, including 2 tribal nations, Forest Service, and 2 private landowners with the help of our NRCS field office, an area forester. So this is active reforestation work on about 1,500 acres. And we call this group of project partners our Palomar Collaborative. And so this model of project planning in the Palomar Collaborative really paved the way for us to participate in the RFFC program. Could you go to the next slide, please? So funding through the RFFC program in late 2019, early 2020, has allowed us to invest in building capacity in the region to expand on this collaborative model. Susie gave a really wonderful overview of the structure of this program statewide. Thanks for that, Susie. And our program, similar to others in the state, works to identify, coordinate, and advance priority project planning to build capacity for project implementation, facilitate a regional collaborative group for resource sharing, and we provide targeted technical assistance to those in the group. And ultimately, we want to work to develop a framework for regional investments and get more projects into implementation phase using creative problem solving to address barriers. Okay, next slide, please. So last one, when asked to identify our biggest challenges in scaling up and managing this work, what comes to mind for me is recruitment and retention of forestry professionals, finding a sustainable pace for my team and myself, and funding. So we're working to find solutions for each of these, obviously, and I can share a little bit about what that looks like. What I mean by recruitment and retention of forestry professionals is plainly that foresters are not generally plentiful in San Diego. And unless you're native to Southern California, you may not even know that we have forested landscapes here. That's been challenging for us. So some of the creative solutions that we've been working through that have been successful so far are a partnership with Grizzly Corps. We have probably hosted fellows through the Grizzly Corps AmeriCorps program for the last 2 service years, and that's really helped to add capacity to our team and delegate some tasks so that we could divide and conquer. We've also created some workforce development programs with project partners, such as a forestry and fuels crew training program for Native American youth. This program empowers them through on-the-job training with both Western and Native American science so that they can then to go to serve their communities as wildland firefighters, a fuels crew, or other environmental programs. We recently have established a partnership agreement with our NRCS field office to co-manage a forestry technical advisor position that will help support both of our teams. We're hoping that that alleviates some of that strain as well. Okay, so for finding a sustainable pace, and maybe self-explanatory, with rapid exponential growth comes growing pains. My team has tripled in size in the last 2 years, and we can't manage all of the projects that we want to see through to completion. Additionally, there's turnover with staff, partner staff and tribal governments often, and that sometimes makes retaining strong partnerships really difficult. So we have to just be persistent and consistent to try and maintain those relationships. We're learning how to navigate funding opportunities and partnership arrangements that will allow for sustainable and fiscally responsible longevity of our programs. And navigating those waters. And lastly is funding. So engaging with landowners and land managers of all scales. We know that administrative burden of competitive grant applications and grant management sometimes prohibits or delays project implementation. Also, as Karen mentioned, the grant to grant funding cycles makes it extremely difficult when you're trying to maintain momentum of scale. We think that regional investments or block grant opportunities with local input will help to streamline this. So we have been working with funding agencies to develop new block grant programs. And we're hoping that this helps to alleviate that as well. So this concludes my presentation. Thanks for your time. If you're interested in learning more about our projects or contacting our team, you can visit our website. It's rcdsandiego.org. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. Excellent. All right, we have well, I'll let the overall decision makers tell us how long we'll do a Q&A, Jonathan and Isabella team, but
I think
question time period. Go ahead, Bella.
probably 5 to 7 minutes, unfortunately, but we
5 to
gotta
7 minutes.
keep grooving.
Sounds good. And I'm assuming we can share contact information for folks that want to ask more questions later. So probably reach out to Bella or others if you didn't pull it off the screen during the presentation. So John, your hand's up. Go for it.
Yes, thanks, Todd. Excellent presentation. Learned a lot as always at a scale meeting. Almost 2 years ago, Sierra Institute published sort of the impediments we all share to getting to landscape level. And now, fortunately, due to a benevolent but anonymous funder, there's a study underway being performed by 2 of the leading public finance consulting firms on multi-year funding for wildfire resilience and forest health work. They're now seeking our cooperation, securing critical data on the cost of range of treatments that you may have already either completed or have under contract. So just a note, look for it. There'll be follow-up information provided by Sierra Institute and a link to a spreadsheet. So if you have any such data that can contribute, it'll facilitate it. Thank you. Thanks. Sierra Institute.
Yeah. Thanks, John. I appreciate that reminder. I have that in my inbox for our team to complete and get out. So I appreciate that. I'm flipping through the screens here looking for raised hands. Not seeing one. Bella, do you have anything in the chat? If not, I'll ask a question. There we go. Norma.
Good morning. Thank you so much for such great presentations. I want to just talk a little about organizational infrastructure. And I'm hoping I'm asking my question clearly. RCDs in themselves, and most of you are in RCDs, have themselves embedded organizational infrastructure to actually deal with these, projects. And so, but when in the sense of a collaborative, like so far, we have partners. And we're just kind of facilitating projects as they go along, trying to make sure that our partners have those connections that they need in order to make their projects happen. What do you see any benefit in these collaboratives that are more like facilitators kind of things, in them having their own organizational infrastructure that includes something like a funding manager or a project coordinator, or not that so far does its own projects, but as to help improve the facilitation of these projects within with our partners. What benefits do you see in having a more formal organizational infrastructure within the collaborative?
Great question, Karen, or Susie or Heather, feel free to take a shot at that one.
Just maybe a quick statement about what we do. We do have very specific roles. So we have project developer roles, we have a tribal engagement director, we have a contracts and admin role. So although we don't do projects, we achieve projects through our partners by disseminating funding back out to them. But we do have folks who have particular roles. We have folks who lead the spatial analysis and planning piece, for example, and the capacity enhancement investments piece, et cetera. So yeah, there is a lot of formal infrastructure within the NCRP, not only the governing and technical input infrastructure, but also the staff infrastructure. And I won't go into a lot of detail, but some of that is documented in the handbook, which is on our website.
How do you fund those positions?
They are funded through a variety of sources. We have a foundational long-term funder in the form of Sonoma Water, which is a water agency, and they provide base funding, which we're really trying to see extrapolated out to the rest of our partners in the region. And it's one of the core questions on our quantitative assessment surveys that we do. What level of base funding would you need to be sustainable over time? And then to be able to really use that base funding to build on your infrastructure capacity to then, do all the other things that you need to do. And so that has been incredibly important in the long-term sustainability of the NCRP. And then in addition to that, we do a lot of grant funding and largely large block grants, whether that's from DWR or the Regional Forest and Fire Capacity Program or CAL FIRE, although they don't call it a block grant, it's a pilot, and other philanthropic and state and federal agency sources of funding.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Karen. Bella, I think that's 5 minutes, so we'll
Okay.
keep to the schedule and I'll turn it
Okay.
over to you. But thank you so much again for excellent presentations and for all the great work you all are doing.
Thanks all. So we just kind of heard right about going to scale. That was the main theme of the first panel. And we're going to kind of change course here and talk more about PACE. And we're specifically going to focus in on emergency authorities, which is a mechanism or tool that can be employed by the Forest Service to kind of get to critical implementation activities quickly. Sierra Institute and the partnership that we work closely with, the South Lassen Watersheds Group, heard about emergency authorities probably a year ago. And when we first heard about them, there was a lot of questions, right? So like, what are they? How many are there? What do they do? What are some of the drawbacks to using them? How are they actually employed? So we're thinking about working with our Forest Service partners, the Lassen and the Plumas, using emergency authorities, hopefully this spring, to get to critical implementation activities this summer, particularly around communities. And this would be before the NEPA decision is formally signed. So, given that we had these questions, we figured this would be a good topic to bring to scale because we assume other partners and collaboratives and forests also have questions about what these authorities are and when it's appropriate to use them. We probably won't get into answering all questions today. This is kind of a big topic, but really trying to give some context so that folks have the capacity to go back to their settings and their scenarios and think about how these might apply a bit more. So we're going to hear from two speakers. The first is Jennifer with Ecosystem Planning at Region 5. She's going to provide an overview about emergency authorities. So again, what are they? How are they used? Some of the big picture context. And then we're going to hear from Gretchen at the Sequoia National Forest. And the Sequoia National Forest has actually used an emergency authority before. And Gretchen's going to provide some context into how that was done, what worked well, and maybe some of the drawbacks they ran into. And then hopefully we'll have some time for Q&A at the end. Sorry to cut the last Q&A off a bit short. So yeah, with that, I will turn it over to Jennifer to kind of start us off.
All right. First of all, I have not used Zoom very much and I have not done a presentation on Zoom. So can you hear me, first of all?
We can, yes.
Perfect. Okay. And then I do have a presentation. And so I think I'll try to share my screen.
Okay. Sounds good. If you need help,
I think that's,
yeah.
let's see.
Perfect.
Is that working? Okay.
Looks
That's funny how
good.
it shows up. Okay. And I'm going to go into a full screen mode, I think. Okay. Does that look okay?
Yep, looks good.
Okay. Okay. Well, thanks you guys. Thanks for the patience too with the technology. So like Bella said, so my name is Jennifer Marcellet and I'm work for the regional Forest Service regional office and in the ecosystem planning staff. I'm actually the regional administrative review coordinator. So I work with the primarily with the objections process, but that also involves NEPA and also the emergency authorities. So I'm gonna again, these emergency authorities, we have a variety of authorities we can use. Emergency authorities, plus we have a lot of expedited NEPA authorities. I'm going to focus on the emergency authorities piece today. I'll be providing kind of that broad overview of the NEPA related emergency authorities. Also share some of our best practices. And then like Bella said, Gretchen Fitzgerald from the Sequoia National Forest will share their experience with the giant sequoia emergency response.
We did too. Yeah.
I'm going to primarily focus on these four authorities. So we have the emergency response, Western Fireshed Emergency Action Determination, the Emergency Situation Determination, and there's another one, Alternative Arrangements. Something to keep in mind is that each of these authorities were developed independently through different regulations or even legislation. So they don't necessarily align or speak to each other very well. And they each have very different requirements and how they interface too with NEPA. So our Forest Service NEPA regulations established some of these, our Forest Service objection regulations, and then like I mentioned, so the bipartisan infrastructure law. So that it makes it really complicated to even, try to describe what some of these are. So let's see. So what, for me to digest some of these I've come up with this idea of, so we have multiple emergency authorities to fit the urgency. So have kind of developed kind of three buckets, on the far left, that most urgent. I won't even hardly speak to that one today. That we actually, in our Forest Service NEPA regulations, we can respond to wildland fires, put fires out, respond to flood events, all those things that are like that immediate threat to life and property, and no NEPA documentation is required, and the approval is at the local line officer level. I'm going to focus mostly on those ones to the right, which, and I have another bucket there, what I was saying, medium urgent, and it's what Bella alluded to. It doesn't quite fit in that immediate urgent wildfire suppression, but gosh, we need to implement before the environmental analysis can be completed. And then on the far right, we have essentially a couple of emergency authorities that waive the objection process. So we have time to complete all of the environmental analysis, all the normal public involvement, but we want to get to that decision faster. And so we have a couple authorities to waive the objections process, which saves 3+ months, at least 3 months of time. And then I'll mention the CEQ alternative arrangements. That I couldn't figure out really where it fits, because that's for EIS level NEPA, where we might have significant impacts. It requires us getting approval from our Council on Environmental Quality. So it's a much more rigorous process to all the way around. But it is a tool that we can use. So I'll just try to describe some of these again a little bit. The slides are a little bit wordy. So the emergency response was established under the Forest Service NEPA regulations. We've actually had this authority since 2008, but we've used it, really have only used it 3 times across the whole agency, and really just in the last few years. And like I mentioned, we don't have the actions can be taken before and during while we're preparing the NEPA analysis. Applies to CE and EA level NEPA, and then we have the emergency situation determination, which was established through the Forest Service objection regulations. Again, simply waives the objections process. This one's been on. We've been able to use this one for a lot of years. It's pretty routinely used, maybe 1 to 2. Each year, and been generally used post-event, and it is applicable to those activities, projects that are achieve one or more of the goals. Mitigate hazards to human health and safety, threats to natural resources, and or avoid loss of commodity value, which means we're going to lose that economic value of the timber if we don't implement very quickly. And losing that value, we can recover that economic value to apply to future restoration projects. So it's been used a lot in post-fire recovery and restoration type of work. And then our newest authority is this, the Western Fireshed EAD, Emergency Action Determination. And essentially, so this was established through the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. It's similar to an ESD, but it applies to an area, not necessarily to a specific project. So it applies to an area. And in this case, the 250 high-risk fire sheds and some post-fire recovery areas have been designated. And then this authority can be used pre-event or post-event. And so it applies to the area, applies to specific activities such as salvage of dead and dying trees, harvested trees to control insects and disease, reforestation, hazard tree removal near roads and trails, and removal of hazardous fuels. And then I'll mention, so the CEQ alternative arrangements, that we haven't used that too much in the last few years. We haven't been doing a lot of EISs for post-fire restoration, or again, requires going to CEQ for getting approval. And how we've used this in the past is to shorten some of the required timelines, such as public comment periods or the waiting periods for an EIS. I'm going to just very quickly, I have a slide here that has some of the examples of where we have used some of these authorities. And again, you'll hear more about the emergency response, which I think, Bella, is probably where you guys are leaning towards for the Lassen and Plumas projects. Like I mentioned, these 3 projects. So hazard tree management, there's a power line clearance project we just used it for, and then the Giant Sequoia emergency response. And then the emergency situation determination, again, has primarily been post-fire restoration, salvage type of work. And we've used it about 3 times in the last 3 years. And then the Western Fireshed EAD is brand new. These 3 projects are the only ones that we've utilized it on in Region 5 so far, but we have a few other projects in the queue as well. Again, primarily focused on wildfire resilience. And then the alternative arrangements through CEQ, it's possibly 2015, maybe a few years, maybe 2016, 17 is the last time we've really used that authority. Yeah, again, post-fire restoration recovery type projects. So I won't spend too much time going through the rest of these slides, but I did want to just mention, again, there's a lot of factors that go into utilizing these different authorities. And, you know, in determining whether and how to apply these authorities, there's, and that it really depends. It's a project by project scenario, case by case scenario. And we have staff in our regional office, including myself, that we like when a forest comes to us early and talks through, you know, here's what our project is, here's what our objectives are, here's why we need that, you know, immediate implementation kind of a thing. And then we talk through what are some different options. We also might even have NEPA authorities such as CEs and things that'll get them to the same place without even needing to use an emergency authority. Some of the best practices, again, we're being encouraged to use these where, you know, where it makes sense. We're highly scrutinizing them internally, but they are available to expedite some of our treatments where everything's aligned and we can get to implementation quickly. The other thing is we're trying to be efficient too with our environmental analysis, Endangered Species Act consultation, taking steps to be ready to implement. So there's a lot of work that's going on while you're doing the environmental analysis and trying to get to the contracting and implementation. And then as a reminder, compliance. So I just have talked about the NEPA related emergency NEPA related emergency authorities, but we have to comply with all the other laws, including Endangered Species Act, National Historic Preservation Act. And in some cases, there's possibility we might need to use one of their authorities to comply with those laws. Let's see. Again, can't emphasize enough, when we get these, use these emergency authorities, we have to be ready to implement quickly. Otherwise, we could have allowed the public to provide more comments. We could have had the objection process. So be ready for timely implementation. These authorities can be used for all or part of a project. In some cases, we've used it for part, like the most, where we're ready to implement and maybe the highest priority, most urgent actions or area that needs that implementation. The other thing, I probably should move this up a little earlier, but that ongoing public engagement and providing early notice to the public that we are considering using this authority. And because we don't want to surprise them. And then, you know, the regular status updates, being transparent, you know, keeping the stakeholders aware of the project and even through implementation. So with that, again, the forests have been really encouraged to, you know, when they have projects, when they're thinking, you know, about these, it's so much easier to have conversations early and provide all the different options. And because these are, like I mentioned in the very beginning, there's a lot of nuances and a lot of details and how you apply these. So with that, so there's a couple of I'll send this presentation to Bella, but myself and then Laura Herholzer, who's our regional environmental coordinator, we're both kind of the staff level contacts for applying these NEPA related emergency authorities. And with that, I think I'm ready to turn it over to, I don't know, Bella, if you wanted to stop for questions or turn it over to Gretchen.
So we're going to turn it to Gretchen. I just wanted to, but before we turn it to Gretchen, I just want to say, yeah, thanks so much, Jennifer. This is really complicated content, and Sierra Institute's actually been really privileged to work with our district rangers on the Plumas and the Lassen and forest supervisors and the regional office to think about how some of these things might apply in specific instances. So really complex, would require some further conversation, absolutely, to think about how to apply in your setting. But I want to be sensitive to time, and Gretchen, I know you're kind of popping in from another meeting and have time for questions. So let's turn it to Gretchen. Jennifer, is this Gretchen's presentation?
No, I added a slide at the very end. Is she on?
Yeah, I think I saw her come on. So she's here.
Okay.
You just have to click that little stop sharing right in the bottom, unless this is what she's going to present to.
Just leave that up
Okay.
for a minute. I
Perfect.
did
Okay.
have a couple of things I did throw together at the last minute, but Jennifer's gives me a good place to start. So I'm Gretchen Fitzgerald. I'm the Ecosystem Staff Officer for the Sequoia National Forest. In 2020, our giant sequoia, well, actually in 2015, our giant sequoia grove started burning up under a high severity wildfire. Giant sequoias are a fire adapted species. Previously, it was extremely rare for a giant sequoia to die in a wildfire. Last known time that we knew of was in 1217, where a small patch of giant sequoias had died in a wildfire. So suddenly in 2020, we had the Castle Fire that burned through 10 giant sequoia groves, and we had about 50% mortality in those groves. And then that's when we started, and we knew that there was fuels issues in those groves. They're fire adapted species. They're accustomed to wildfire. We've been suppressing wildfires, for the last 150 years, and fuels were accumulating. There had been some management in some of the groves, but in 2017, we had an exceptional drought, killed 50% of the overstory in some cases of our whitewood forest, our conifer forest. So it became just this giant fuel accumulation all around these trees that were fire adapted. And so, Jennifer, if you stop sharing, I'll just share a picture of what it looks like, kind of a before and after. Let me see here. Can you see that?
We can, yes.
We can, yes. Okay. So the picture on the left is Deer Creek. They're both Deer Creek Grove. Left is before the fire, right is after the fire. So these sequoias were burning, and you can see how small all the trees around them were. And so those were trees that, would have been killed during a normal fire cycle year, and it had gotten really dense with a lot of small trees. So we really wanted to do something. We thought we had a little more time after the castle. We didn't realize the next year the Windy Fire would burn through another 10 giant sequoia groves. And we had a team that went out and tried to do some work during the fire to try and limit the mortality of some of these giants. I think we were somewhat successful. But so then at that point, we started talking internally, how can we move faster on these groves? And then in July, so this is a year after the Windy Fire, the forest supervisor calls me and says, the chief wants to declare an emergency for giant sequoias. You have this weekend to figure out what you want. The regional forester is going to call you, and we have to get everything to the regional office by Monday. So I spent the weekend trying to figure out what groves. So we've already lost, 20 of our groves have already burned, but not all of them had burned all through, right? So there was portions that hadn't burned, because some of our groves are 2,500 acres, some are 10 acres. So it just, depends. So we put together a list of all of the groves that we had and figured out which ones we thought needed emergency treatment. And then she wanted me to do it not only for the Sequoia National Forest, but for all of the sequoias in the National Forest system. And so then I reached out. We have 3 other groves, 1 on the Tahoe and 2 on the Sierra. Reached out to them, but I wasn't allowed to tell anybody that this was going to happen. So I had to kind of figure out what was going on in those groves without telling anybody why I wanted to know. And then anyway, on Monday, we sent everything to the regional office. They reviewed it, put the briefing paper together for the chief, and then sent it to the chief. He declared the emergency later that week. And then, so my forest supervisor was Teresa Benson, and she was, had known this was coming. So she put some thought into it. And so we decided to treat it like a fire. And I put together kind of a list of all the steps that we took to, let's see if I can, there we go. Okay. To do this. So the first thing was to put together for the emergency declaration, what it is that we were declaring an emergency for, with all of the activities in each grove. And then I think Jennifer was very involved in this. I can't remember who, but we developed a big briefing paper for the chief. Then he declared an emergency, and then it was the forest job to send it out to the public. So the whole thing of public participation is really critical to keep the public involved and know what's happening. And then we set it up like a fire organization. So we had an IC. I was the deputy IC. And so the IC was sort of a fire person who understood how that organization worked. And then I was sort of the technical person on all of this. And then as we went along, it grew, and we had branch chiefs, we had task force leaders, we had, and we used we have in Porterville, we have these overhead crews, which are AD crews. And so we have during all summer long, we have these, we have about 400 crews here, or 400 people, 20 crews. And so we were able to use them because it was first, and then we also had to figure out funding, right? So this emergency was declared, but it wasn't necessarily a funded project. And so then we had to work with the regional office to get funding. And then we put these crews to work and then ordered resources. So as Jennifer mentioned, even though it's a emergency from the Forest Service's standpoint, SHPO and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service did not consider it to be an emergency. And so we had to still comply with their with those laws. And so what we did was we ordered reeds. So with SHPO, we worked it out that basically the archaeologists would go in front of the crews, do the Archae surveys. At the end of the day, they would complete a 106 report, turn that in, and the next day do another one. So every day was a different, and then we tried to get ahead of it. So we had about 200 people working on the mountain at a time, 2 different districts. So then we had a branch chief on each district, and then they had leaders, and that was all handwork. And we were just, the goal was to treat around the giants and in the worst places. So if we had a fire that fall, those trees wouldn't die. And so that was just all handwork, those people out there cutting and moving those fuels away from those trees and creating piles. And then at the same time, we also ordered some foresters. So we had foresters come from other forests to help put together a contract. So the plan was to sort of set up this fire organization for the fall, trees around the giants, and then have things ready in place to have a contract the next spring that we could award and start doing the work. And so we had reeds to flag SMZs, do goshawk surveys, spotted owl surveys, archaeology surveys. And then we put together the contract, and then, that winter we were burning piles, writing burn plans. So one of the activities was we had 3 remote groves. So we put together a plan to do a prescribed burn in that area. And we sent some hand crews in there to just treat minimally around the 2 of the groves that we could get to. The 3rd one, I never could figure out how to get anybody to. We ordered some drone footage of that. So it gave us a lot of flexibility to order resources and get help by having this emergency. And then the big part though that, and Jennifer touched on this, is the public participation. We sent out letters, we had field trips. We ordered 5, for the first tour, we had like 5 public information officers come in and start producing a communication plan for us and talking points and some video coverage that we could share and explain to the public what we were doing. And then because this was declared as an emergency from the Washington office, there was also a lot of accountability and reporting, to upward reporting that we needed to do to let people know what we were doing and why. And letting the chief know that we were following through. And then we had to work on trying to get funding for our contract. And then, like I mentioned, it was across a couple of others. So the Sierra was also part of this. And so we included them in our contract. We ended up with 3 different contracts to treat the different groves, all going on simultaneously. And so then we needed, timber sale admin support. So it definitely, basically, it was like a fire where it sort of impacts your whole forest, and everyone sort of focused on that as the #1 priority because it was an emergency. But we got a lot done. We treated fuels around, all of the large giant sequoias. We had a 3-foot diameter minimum. So anything larger than 3 feet, we were going to treat around. And so we treated, depending on the grove, 25 to 75 feet around each giant. We created over 20,000 piles. It could have been more. One of the other things I neglected to mention was one of the groves, from a partnership standpoint, we turned over to a partner. And so I put that agreement together once we got funding for it in that winter, and turned one of the groves over to them. So that was Save the Redwoods League, and they took charge of one of those groves, and then 5 groves were in the contract. Some of the groves that were little and remote, they didn't have any contract work done in them. So we were just focusing on the big groves. The contract work was in the big groves where there was some component of mechanical work, and that had not burned at all, and that were easier to access. We found out that treating giant sequoias is really complicated because all the old growth dependent species are there. We found several new spotted owl and goshawk nets. We found it's also really important for cultural reasons. So there were a lot of archaeology sites. Giant sequoias live where there's a good water table, and so there's a lot of riparian issues that we had to work around. So it wasn't easy, but we did, haul off more than 100,000 tons of biomass out of these groves. We still have a little bit of biomass to haul off of Black Mountain, and about half the piles still need to be burned. And then there was that one prescribed burn that we haven't, getting those burn plans written are really complicated. So, but here's just a couple pictures of what we got done. And that's it. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. We intended to have a break right now for 15 minutes. I would love to take 1 or 2 questions max, and then we'll go into more like 10-minute break and pick back up. Any pressing questions for either Jennifer or Gretchen?
I have a question.
Okay, let's take 2. So we'll take Janet and Kelly, and then we'll go to break. Let's do Kelly first.
With these emergency authorities, have they been applied to partner-led NEPAs, or are they just the internal NEPAs that you guys are doing in-house?
I'm trying to think if there's no reason they can't be applied to partner-led NEPA. I'd have to, there's not an example coming to mind that where we have done that, but there's no reason it can't be. So
Gretchen, do you want to add to that? It looks like you had your hand up.
Yeah. So I neglected to mention how we handled the NEPA for the Giant Sequoia Emergency Response. So we were working on EAs that included some of those groves. But one of those was a partner-led NEPA. The Windy Fire Restoration had a giant sequoia grove in it that was part of that. And so they were working on the NEPA, and the declaration basically said you'll follow all these mitigations that are in these draft NEPA documents. And then some of them didn't have any kind of NEPA started on them. So then we had to follow up with like, document sort of an IDT review after the fact, because the chief made the decision. So it's just sort of the analysis. But the decision basically said, everything you're going to do out there has to fall under a CE, a CE sort of authority. So we weren't allowed to do things that might have required an EA. But yeah, one of those EAs was written by a partner.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to go to Janet. I also want I just want to call attention to the chat. Will has a really critical comment in the chat. Maybe we'll go to Janet. I'll see if Will has anything to add, and then we can go to break. Janet, to you.
Yeah, thanks. This is a pretty interesting conversation. I'm curious if those of you who work on the policy end of like defining an emergency have anything to share with how close are we to being able to, and this is more from a funding perspective, maybe not a NEPA perspective, that maybe ties the first panel to this one, but how far are we away from being able to secure ample funding for that sustained funding comment that we've heard from lots of us, recognizing that it is an emergency to treat forests at a pretty big scale now. And the reason I ask is in a recent conversation with some of the ISHWE folks, they just mentioned a metric that $700 million was the hazard tree contract in the Camp Fire of the federal investment. So like, how do we flip the script and have that type of funding go to the proactive stuff so we're not losing everything? So.
Jennifer, Gretchen, or others want to kind of respond. I don't know if that's totally just totally just to them, but others are welcome to weigh in on that as well. It's a big question.
Yep.
I can comment a little bit, because that was why the GSER was so critical, was, we were seeing our sequoia groves being lost, and that's where we were pouring all of our money and time, was in post-fire recovery, and the drum was starting to beat louder and louder. What about all these groves that hadn't burned? And so then that's what it's like, yeah, the fuel situation out there is so bad, we declared an emergency to be proactive and treat those groves. So I'm hearing what you're saying. Yeah. And I think that's also what the wildfire crisis strategy whole emphasis is realizing that we need to treat places ahead of time, and the focus that the regional office is putting on that.
Perfect. Thank you. Will, I want to give you a moment or two if you want to speak to the comment that you put in the chat. If you can't, that's fine, but I think it's an important one.
Yeah, thanks for that, Bella. I just, we're seeing more and more instances where the logging is occurring in these burned areas under that the emergency exemption created by the wildfire on larger and larger landscapes. And so it's just a trend that we're seeing where it's this last NEPA-free area where a bunch of actions, including road upgrades and all that stuff is being fit into. I mean, they clear cut along miles of the Klamath River as part of the McKinney fire, actions that are having severe impacts to the environment are more and more being squeezed into this hole. And it rankles me that, fire suppression actions and fire exclusion in particular, the putting out of fires in May and October, is still being not analyzed. I mean, how can we call this a natural situation when we continue to exclude fire from these fire dependent ecosystems? And so I just, I really hope that folks can push for that, push the agencies to say, hey, we need to think about the ecological and social and economic impacts of continued fire exclusion, fire suppression. I think it's happening at several different levels, and yet we still see the rise of more and more actions being done under that exemption. And just, you know, on the topic of Gretchen's conversation or presentation, you know, I think it's spot on that we need to be thinking about spot treatments around our legacy trees. Often those legacy trees pop up on LiDAR before the fires, you know, when there's a chance to save them, and using prescribed fire or preparing those landscapes to have a wildfire and those legacy trees to survive. So modifying our fuels treatments from like blanket treatments over the whole entire area and just focusing in on those components of the forest that we want to save in that next wildfire.
Thanks, Will. I'm going to go to Jonathan to kind of close us out for this session.
Will, thank you for your comments. And Janet, great question. You knew from asking the question that we were not going to have time to get to all of that and the depth of the question and the complexity of it as well. But it is fundamental to, I'm guessing, just about everybody who participates. How do we flip the script? And how do we make a difference in the near term now because of the urgency that we're facing? And Will, your point is so fundamentally excellent in terms of a wrap up of the panel, which is emergency authorities does not mean we should be ignoring the will of the groups and the public. There are emergencies, and there are emergencies all over the place. It is a fundamental role of collaboratives in contributing to what's acceptable and how local knowledge plays into where action should take place. So to underscore the point again, emergency authorities should not preclude the wishes, expectations, hopes, and desires for landscape treatments. In fact, they should be consistent with. And that's when, again, there is the social license to do that. And Janet, I know I didn't get to your question as well, which is a great one. It is part of the scale challenge, which is how do we do this and flip this script instead of just responding to emergencies, but we talk about funding that is consistent over long term. So I won't take more time, Bella. I'll put it back to you. But Janet, thank you for the question. And Will, your comment as well. Excellent closure to the panel. Bella?
Yeah, so let's take 10 minutes. Let's come back at in 10 minutes at the 55 mark, and we'll just kind of squeeze 5 minutes off that next panel, which I think we have the space for in closing and such. But honestly, 5 minutes late is actually pretty good. So yeah, thanks everybody, and we'll see you back. You can turn your cameras and mute, and we'll see you back in 10 minutes.
let's go ahead and launch back in. Bella, are we ready to go?
Yeah, so Jonathan Birdsong is going to moderate this panel. I'm trying to find folks on my screen. Okay, I see you.
I'm here.
Jonathan, thank you.
My pleasure. Jonathan Kuzel, Bella, everybody from Zach from the Sierra Institute, thanks so much for the time today. I've had the pleasure of sitting in on most of the presentations this morning. And I think this has just been a fantastic conversation so far. And I'm delighted to be moderating this panel on landscape restoration, implementation, and financing, and how is funding getting on the ground. We have 3 presenters: Matt Millar from the National Forest Foundation, Anna Yip from Blue Forest, and Richard Sykes from the Upper Mokelumne River Watershed Authority. And in looking at the presentations and listening to folks when we've had calls prior to this meeting today, well, I think you'll get 2 things out of these presentations. One is that every group that you'll hear from today is very entrepreneurial. They want to get as much funding on the ground to do this work in the most effective way possible. And the second thing I'll mention is that I think we all want to be in a place that where Janet Hatfield just mentioned and Will Harling just mentioned, where we're out of the cycle of constantly having to respond to disasters and really being proactive on the ground. And with the I work for the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, and I'll say this about working in Region 5. In several other agencies that we work with across the organization, and this is not meant to be disparaging, but sometimes it's hard to get to yes. Region 5 in the Forest Service in California, it's hard to get to no. They have been willing and able to work with us in a very entrepreneurial way, which allows the groups that we're going to be hearing from today to really put on their thinking caps and do their due diligence on trying to expedite the funding, getting more funding on the ground, so on and so forth. And organizationally, we've been working with the region really in earnest for about the last 8 years. And each time we're working through different ways in which to make things better, not necessarily to create a new mousetrap, but how do we make this mousetrap better? And so many of the groups on this call have responded back to a recent solicitation that we put out, which is really the culmination of all of that work together. So, and over those years, and really helping mold a better opportunity to help get the money on the ground, number one, but also number 2, building the capacity necessary in all parts of the state that is so important. So, without further ado, I'm delighted to introduce Matt Millar with the National Forest Foundation, and he will be speaking to us about the work that they're doing throughout the region. So Matt, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan. Hey, good morning, everyone. My name is Matt Millar. I'm with the National Forest Foundation. I'm the director of our Sierra Nevada program. So briefly, I'll just quickly describe and introduce the National Forest Foundation, who we are, and then a very top contour overview of generally how the National Forest Foundation works. And then really looking forward to the following discussion and question and answer. So the National Forest Foundation, we are a nonprofit. We were chartered by Congress in the early 90s, 1993, to be the official nonprofit partner of the U.S. Forest Service. We are by no means the only nonprofit that works with the U.S. Forest Service, but due to our origin and how we were created, our general work focuses on national forest lands or private lands that are immediately adjacent to national forest lands that, if work were to occur there, would provide some type of immediate benefit to National Forest Service lands. But because of our mission and because of how we were created, primarily our teams within NFF will focus on National Forest Service lands, and really in 2 general categories or 2 general areas or buckets of work. High level, those would be recreation infrastructure, so things like trail maintenance, trail building, repairs around visitor centers, recreation, outreach and communication, anything that has to deal with supporting the recreation needs on federal Forest Service lands. And then the other area of work that we focus in on very broadly, you could think of vegetation management or ecosystem management, planning, and project implementation. And so really the whole range of work, whether that's some type of focus on restoration, say in a wetland or meadow system, all the way to fuels reduction, commercial logging, and everything that you would find in between. The National Forest Foundation has 115 staff spread across the nation. And in the Sierra Nevada program, we currently have 10 full-time staff with planned growth to add another 7 or 8 staff over the next 12 to 18 months. So still on a growth trajectory to respond to some of the needs that we've all been discussing and hearing about here today. So now how we work. In general, we really don't work, well, we probably work very similar to a lot of how you all work. We are a nonprofit. We do award grants, and I'll talk about that a little bit later, but for the most part, we are operating much like you all operate. A few things that we do have internal to our organization that help us function and provide expertise that we can leverage in our work. We have a fairly robust development and fundraising team. So their primary focus is on individual giving, individual donations, all the way to corporate partnerships with entities that may have an interest in supporting programs of work. We have a reforestation team that specializes in reforestation efforts. Again, there's a fundraising component, but also the fundraising for that particular team really revolves around then purchasing seedlings and supporting landscape scale reforestation efforts across the country as well. And then another large team within NFF is a field staff team. And you can think of that team as staff that are locally based around forest units that have a need for partnership support. And those field staff act as, well, they wear a lot of different hats, but they do a lot of localized fundraising. So aggressively pursuing any type of grant opportunity that would exist, any local business fundraising opportunities that might exist, and then also supporting the Forest Service in their identification of a broad pipeline of projects that NFF can support, and then thinking about how NFF can aggregate different types of funding that I had mentioned there to bring to implementation, and then take lead on managing the implementation of those projects through master stewardship agreements. And really how we do that is we work closely and integrate in with Forest Service staff at all levels, from leadership level staff all the way down to the district seasonal staff that are in the weeds, to really understand what their needs are, what their 5, 8, 10-year plan of work is, and really understand and help them identify and strategize out what an implementation timeline would look like. As we do that and align with what their priorities are, we then start to strategically identify as many different funding sources that I had just previously mentioned to bring in aggregate to those projects. So again, aggregating federal funds, state grant funds, private donations, funding from beneficiaries of the work. We'll talk about that a little bit later on this panel. And then again, through the master stewardship agreement, taking ownership of those projects and implementing them, managing them through our internal processes, which are non-federal processes, which, as we all know, can be a bit more nimble than the Forest Service processes. And so once we get to that point to implementation and we've aggregated that funding, and at some points along the way, in the different areas that we work, we're always looking and trying to involve ourselves and partner in collaborative groups if they exist where we're operating. Not all forests, not all districts across the Sierra Nevada program have an active collaborative, but where they do exist, we try and integrate in those groups and work with those groups. And through that, we can identify strategic partnerships with other local nonprofits, For example, we've partnered with local nonprofits that have a specialty in invasive plant removal. That's not something that we have internal staff that do, but there are nonprofits out there that do that. And so we can look to bring them on or hire them and get them under contract or work with them in some way to bring that expertise. Same with, say, monitoring in watersheds or different types of monitoring needs that a project might need. As we all know, there's just a great diversity of different localized nonprofits that have a lot of those skill sets. So through those collaborative groups, we try and identify where we can leverage all of those expertise. And then even in the fundraising stage, we have worked with local groups, for example, one in the Eastern Sierra, the White Bark Institute, where they received a state grant and then subcontracted us to help with the scope of work within that. And we've also done the opposite, where we've been the lead applicant on a state grant and then have subgranted out a portion of that budget to a local nonprofit for them to lead some subset of that work because of a specialty or expertise that they have. So those are all really great strategic ways that partners can work together, and it's something that we always seek. And then in areas where there aren't a lot of active partners or collaboratives, then we will look to go through a competitive process to hire private industry directly. We also have an invited grant process, which gives us some flexibility to hire those or bring on those local nonprofits and work with them in a diversity of ways as well. And just one last way we can work with local entities. NFF does have a matching awards program. So it's a grant program where we distribute grants twice a year. That's not through the field staff team, that's through another internal team at NFF. But in addition to the different ways that we work, that MAP grant program is also a way that NFF can move money to local organizations that are doing work on federal land. So I think I'm about time there, so I'll stop, but looking forward to some discussion topics that may have come out of that, or if there's some things that people want to dig into a little bit more. Thanks, Jonathan.
Matt, thank you so much. That was great information. Any questions for Matt before we move on to our next speaker? Great. Well, I'm delighted to introduce Anna Yip with Blue Forest. I was excited to see that Anna is in this role. In our previous lives, I worked with Anna when she was with Sonoma County. So Anna, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Yeah, it's nice to see some friendly faces from past lives, but it's great to meet you all. I am here in my new role to talk to you all coming from Blue Forest. I'm a project development manager at Blue Forest, which is a 501c3 nonprofit organization that specializes in using conservation finance to combat the wildfire crisis. And we do this in a few different ways. We've got a top-notch science and research team. We've got a stellar team that specializes in conservation and restoration related investment opportunities and asset management. But I am here to talk to you all today about the Forest Resilience Bond specifically. This is one of our innovative conservation finance tools. So what is an FRB? The Forest Resilience Bond is an innovative public-private partnership that deploys private capital to do two distinct things. First, to ease cash flow constraints, and secondly, to add new revenue streams, both in efforts to help accelerate on-the-ground restoration work. Now, another way that we like to introduce this concept is through kind of the three main goals of the FRB. The Forest Resilience Bond helps make projects happen at a faster pace. So FRBs act as a line of credit and finance restoration work to help our partners overcome reimbursement delays. FRBs provide all of the upfront capital needed for project work to enable this faster implementation. And this allows our partners to pay out contractors within 7 to 10 days. And it can also help smooth cash flows and seamlessly combine multiple different funding sources, which enables smooth, consistent, ongoing work. FRBs also help make larger projects happen by bringing in non-traditional funding to the table. The way we tend to think about it is that there are lots of different people, lots of different groups that stand to benefit from healthier, better managed landscapes. I know I don't need to explain that to this group. And we, alongside a number of different partners, including folks at the World Resources Institute, quantify ecosystem benefits or ecosystem services to motivate new funding streams to come to the table for implementation. And then lastly, FRBs are also designed in a way specifically to promote partnership opportunities, to build local capacity and leverage funds in the regions that they're implemented in. So we strive to work closely with place-based implementation partners to help support local workforce development, economic stimulation, help convene key stakeholders and partnership networks. And our work has also proven to be really successful in helping leverage dollars and attract funding to the landscape for greater impact. So that was a pretty general overview of what the FRB is and kind of the main goals of the FRB. And this slide here gives a look into the more logistical aspects of how an FRB operates from kind of a 100-foot level. So I'm going to run through this flow of funds diagram starting on the left-hand side of the screen with our investors. Investors are typically impact-oriented investors looking for modest below market rate returns. They input their funds into the FRB, which is a special purpose vehicle that houses the funds for this specific project. Funds then flow from our FRB to our implementation partners, and they oversee the on-the-ground work, the restoration activities that are happening on the landscape that lead to a range of many different benefits. Benefits are then felt by these different entities that we very creatively refer to as our beneficiaries. And Blue Forest helps quantify and put a value on these benefits. And we then work to set up individual funding agreements for each entity based on their individualized expected benefits. And there are potentially a range of entities who would stand to benefit from a given restoration project, and this helps reduce the cost to everyone. So beneficiaries then pay back into the FRB over time, as agreed upon in those agreements that I just talked about. And they do this as they realize their benefits, which reduces their financial risk. And I also always think it's worth calling out here that beneficiaries realize benefits that outweigh their financial contributions. And this is what creates this win-win scenario for folks and is oftentimes what incentivizes beneficiaries to come to the table and to contribute to an FRB. Our implementation partners also then pay back their line of credit into the FRB over time, typically as they're reimbursed through state, federal, or other funding sources. And the FRB then pays back investors over time. We have created the FRB in a way that strives to streamline participation for all of our partners. And so for folks like our implementation partners, this means that they keep operating largely business as usual, and an FRB just unlocks more work to be done at a faster pace. And then for other partners, like the beneficiaries that we engage with, FRBs open up new opportunities to participate in landscape scale, landscape level restoration work without them having to take on the administrative burden of managing the project or any of the on-the-ground implementation or monitoring and tracking afterwards. This slide here shows us an overview of where Blue Forest is currently working on FRB efforts in California. And I just want to call out, we're not limited to California. We're leading some really exciting work up north in Oregon, Washington, and we're exploring some other potential opportunities eastward. But I'm focusing here given the context of this workshop. And this list on the left side of this, or sorry, on the right side of the screen is categorized by three main stages of FRB project development. So at the top, starting off in the yellow category, we've got active projects. And these are FRBs that are launched, in motion, being implemented, and in one of these cases, the Yuba 1 project at the top, near completion. Then we've got a handful of projects in the design phase, which is in the green category. And these are projects that are far along in the project development timeline, but just not yet formally active. So these are projects that agreements are perhaps being finalized, just not yet signed, and an FRB launch is expected in the near future. And then lastly, we've got our explore projects. And these are projects that are still earlier on in the project development timeline, where pilot site selection, implementation sequencing, key stakeholder and partner identification might still be factors being finalized, but all of the key critical components for a successful FRB have been identified, and the potential for a successful FRB launch is promising. So you might be wondering, what then are these key critical components for a successful FRB? Lucky for you, my next slide covers this. So here are the typical features of an FRB ready project. For the sake of time, I'm just going to run through the green items on the list, which are, this list captures kind of the most critical features. The grayed out ones are there mainly for your reference, and they represent other positive aspects to have, but are not quite as critical. So to start us off, there are some key operational and landscape related features necessary for a successful FRB. The proposed project needs to be planned, permitted, and scalable. So Blue Forest does not get involved in the planning and the permitting processes, and we look for shovel-ready shelf stock projects or projects that are near completion for their planning and permitting and maybe just waiting on final decisions to be filed. And then to the last point of scalability, we look for projects that can scale up in size. FRBs have proven really successful with this kind of pilot to scale model, and we prioritize this criteria when considering new projects so that we can amplify our impact. We also look to the land manager for their support, which typically comes from staff of a Forest Service unit where the project is being implemented, and their leadership needs to have adequate capacity to make sure that the project can be pushed through on their end from a decision-making perspective. And then kind of related to that point, the proposed project should also be identified as a priority landscape for the land manager. And this will feed into making sure we have strong land manager support and leadership capacity. There also needs to be a beneficiary presence on the landscape, and more specifically, we're looking for at least one, if not more, promising beneficiary that's identified or better yet, engaged on the landscape. And this means that the beneficiary needs to have the financial capacity to contribute in a meaningful way to the effort. And the project should be aligned with the organization's services and or their strategic priorities. There also needs to be at least one non-state or non-federal beneficiary on the landscape. And this is to ensure that funds can be brought to the table that can be used more flexibly to cover costs and fees associated with conservation finance, like interest and closing fees. So we're thinking like a private utility or a corporation that is based out of this landscape or nearby where we're doing the work. And also, when considering new projects, we look to identify an implementation partner, and this implementation partner needs to have the capacity to lead or contract out the work that is outlined in the project plan. And the partner also critically needs to demonstrate the ability to receive a no to low cost loan through the FRB, as well as potential for additional grants. And then this last main category on the screen shows the last main category on the screen is science and data. And in some, there needs to be benefits that would result from the project that are quantifiable and relevant. And this means that models and analyses need to cover this type of quantification, and the benefits in question need to be of interest or relevant to the identified beneficiaries. And my last slide here before I hand it back to you, Jonathan, this one here kind of covers some of the key partners needed to come together to ensure the success of a project. It doesn't capture all of the partners, but just 3 key ones that we thought might be of specific interest to this group here. So to start us off, we've got our land manager, which is oftentimes the U.S. Forest Service when, again, doing projects on Forest Service land. And as I called out in the last slide, it's critical that the land manager supports the project and has the capacity to push it forward. And this is because their role typically includes things like planning and approving the project, identifying and selecting implementation partners, providing data and perspective on impacts, working closely with Blue Forest and their selected implementation partner on sequencing, and then, of course, overseeing the implementation that is happening on their land. Then we've got our implementation partner, which is again selected by the land manager, and they are responsible for helping implement the planned actions. They are also critically the lead applicant on state and other grants and are responsible to collect the funds from the grantors. And they work alongside Blue Forest and the land manager to support the development of cost estimates and project sequencing as needed. And they also perform the work, administer contracts, and supervise contractors. Wrapping it up with us at Blue Forest, we step in and we ensure that the ecological and economic modeling, so that's the modeling of the benefits or those ecosystem services, gets completed. We also help lead the engagement with those third-party beneficiaries, oftentimes alongside other key partners. And we work with our other partners in supporting the development of cost estimates, project sequencing, and we arrange the financing and contracts for the project from the FRB perspective. So that was a rapid fire run through of what an FRB is. Now y'all are experts on the FRB and conservation finance. There will be a quiz that follows this. No, I jest. Here is contact information for myself as well as Matt, who's also on the call. We're here to answer questions if you've got any either now or later. Always happy to talk through conservation finance, FRB things. And I'll hand it back over to you, Jonathan.
Great, thanks, Anna. Any questions for Anna now before we move on to our next panelist? John, you have your hand up. The floor is yours.
John, you're muted still if you're talking.
Okay, we're going to move on from John. Norma.
Thank you, Anna, for a very informative presentation. I just have 2 points of clarification, 2 questions regarding clarification. Earlier slide, you talked about your investors. Could you, I wasn't sure who, quote, are your investors? Could you clarify that again for me, please?
Yeah, of course. And I think you're referring to this slide here where we
Right,
call
that's
out
correct.
Yeah. So there is a range of different investors that Blue Forest works to bring funds to the table. That is definitely a responsibility that falls on Blue Forest's side in creating an FRB. And typically these can make up a broad range of different kind of impact-oriented investors who are looking for that modest below market rate return. So these are kind of philanthropic investors, or potentially too, we've got some, I know, investors that fall under the category of kind of pension funds as well. Matt, do you want to add any detail or color to that?
I think that's great, Anna, and I think highlighting that those investors are what allows Blue Forest to have a pool of money, Norma, that we can create that line of credit with that Anna described. And so these are folks putting their money into a project, the expectation that the money will be returned to them after the project, after it's done easing those cash flows associated with reimbursable grants.
So I know this is kind of a long shot question. I don't want to get anybody's hopes up. So if we become aware of an investor that perhaps is interested in the FRB, who do we contact? Is there something special I should that should be told to that investor with regards to the Forest Fund? Or do we just refer them to you guys?
It would be great if we could be referred to them. Our FRB model is very complex and tricky, and after 6 months of working at Blue Forest, I'm finally feeling like I fully understand the model. So all that to say, we would love to be connected directly with them to talk through it. And it could be the case too, where it might be somebody who's looking to potentially become a beneficiary on a project or an investor. Those are 2 different roles, but we're always happy to be connected with folks who might be willing to play either one of those roles in a project.
Thank you very much. My other question had to relate with the last slide. I wanted to make sure you talked about the implementation partner. You said something about the implementation partner is named by the land manager. Did I hear that correctly?
Yes, correct. So it is ultimately up to the land manager to select the implementation partner.
And then you guys work with the implementation partner to get all those, to help with the economic modeling and all the support documentation. Is that
Yes,
correct?
exactly. Yeah. And we work closely with all of our partners on that. I think one of the clear distinctions too with our role with the implementation partner is that our line of credit that we extend is directly to the implementation partner. So we help finance the implementation partner in covering the costs associated with getting their work done.
Perfect.
Thanks,
Thank you so
Norma.
very much.
We've got two other two other questions, and then we've got to move on to our next panelist. So, John?
Yes, thank you. I'm live. I would definitely fail any test you gave me on this, but I deeply appreciate how creative and entrepreneurial you are. Could you help clarify the type of beneficiary, perhaps through a specific project? What type of beneficiaries have you worked with, and what are the specific type of benefits for which they might pay? That sounds like almost magic that you can do that.
That is a great question, and I'll try to run through this as quickly as possible, Jonathan. So I think a great example, maybe I'll pull from our Yuba project that I mentioned earlier as one of our active projects. So we've engaged with the Yuba Water Agency, which is a water provider in the Yuba watershed. And we helped identify them as a beneficiary because they stood to benefit from our restoration work that we were doing in such a way that it resulted in higher water quantity for them. So if you can imagine, a overgrown forest takes up more water than a thinned, managed, more natural state forest does. So one of the benefits, one of the co-benefits of going through and doing forest restoration work is we're thinning trees, we're reducing the amount of live plants that are in the landscape, which increases the amount of water. And so Yuba Water Agency was able to directly see an increase in water quantity for their organization. And they agreed to pay into an FRB in an agreement over the course of 5 years as they were seeing these benefits. Matt, do you want to add something?
Just a big shout out to NFF, who is the implementation partner on that project and also helped us approach Yuba Water.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, John. Richard, last question.
So, hey, and Matt, so this is kind of a question and just add on to the presentation. We're an implementation partner, and we moved from, as soon as I signed an agreement that our board approved on Friday, I guess one of those on that table moves from design to implementation. And so when I talk about, I'm the next presenter. So I work for the Upper Mokelumne River Watershed Authority. And this is part of the, so this is in the bottom, the third one down in design moves to active as soon as Matt and I get around to signing that agreement. It's part of getting to scale. So we looked at, our near-term goals, doing 4,000 acres of forest health work a year. And we're just about at that. And we need some funding. Either, we can't, this is grant funded work. So there's a 90 to roughly 120 days to be reimbursed once we get an invoice for that work. And we can either put that on the contractor or find a better way. So that FRB for us is a $4 million line of credit. It's a 6-year term, and you guys will like the interest, which is 0. So it saves money, allows us to get more acres done. So thank you, Blue Forest. That was a good effort. We've worked on that for about 2 years.
And what a great transition.
Yeah, Richard, the floor is yours.
All right. Well, I'm on plan B for my internet connection. I'm on a 2-bar Wi-Fi hotspot, so hopefully this will it'll continue to work. My regular Wi-Fi pooped out about just before the break.
Richard, do you want somebody else to drive your slide deck?
Zach's going to drive the slide deck, and so we can, when he gets that up. But let me just introduce myself. I got a couple hats. I am on I'm the executive officer for the Upper Mokelumne River Watershed Authority. I'll talk about that in a minute. I also am a member of the consensus group called the Amador Calaveras Consensus Group. And our forest health program is really done in partnership with them. We're basically one of the implementing members of the ACCG. So we have kind of taken on that role as implementing. So go to the next slide and I'll talk about UMRA for a minute. So we're a joint powers authority. We formed in 2000 to deal with water quality, water supply, natural resources issues in the MAC region, which is Amador, Calaveras, and parts of Alpine County. We have an 8-member board of directors, so it includes supervisors from Alpine County, Amador County, and Calaveras County, and then elected officials from several of the water districts that for which the Macombie River is an important source of their supply. So we have 2 part-time staff. I'm one of them, and then we have contractors that take care of certain aspects of our forestry program. Is done in conjunction with Landmark Environmental. That's allowed us, when I talk more soon, it's allowed us to ramp up. Next slide, please. This next slide is a map of our service area, or at least the UMRA area. So this is what we call the MAC region, Macombie, Amador, Calaveras region, which extends all the way into Alpine County. I think so it's not as big as some of the other regions we've seen, but it's maybe, I'm trying to think about this region is probably about 800 square miles. All right, next slide, please. So our key activities right now, we've spent a lot of effort working on forest health initiatives with a lot of partners, and some of these partners have been foundational. We wouldn't have a program if it wasn't for some, and I'll call those out as I move along. We're that MAC region, so we're the Integrated Regional Water Management Agency for the region. So we update the plan for that, and we apply it and administer grants. We've done some region-wide assessments that include just our region. So these are things on watershed health and vulnerabilities, and then we've also planned with in San Joaquin County, also in the MOQUAs. And then we've centralized grant functions for our members. So we apply for those IRWM grants, maybe other grants, work on advocacy together, and other things that, activities supporting watershed health. And then we also have we've been a longtime supporter for a local schools program. Next slide, please. So that's UMRA. And in 2015, there's a few of you on this participating today who saw the Butte fire up close. Many of us, I didn't live in that fire footprint, but many people I worked with did, and several of them lost their homes. That was in 2015, the UMRA board saw this risk of Butte, the rim fire that occurred earlier, and we got pretty motivated to do something about it. And so in 2016, executed a master stewardship agreement with Region 5. So this was covered both our part of our watershed is split between in the south, the Stanislaus National Forest, and the north, the El Dorado National Forest. So even at that point, we recognized the need to increase the scale of work. But we started, the first 4 years were pretty limited, but we did a number of modest-sized lateral projects, primarily in the Calaveras Ranger District. Those were maybe 5. We participated with the Forest Service for maybe 500 to up to 1,000-acre projects. Pretty small, dispersed, and in some ways absent a comprehensive watershed or large-scale plan. So that's why we started the Forest Projects Plan. So next slide, please, Zach. So first off, I apologize for our kind of lousy, unimaginative name, but that's what we got. It sounds better if we call it the FPP. But so what our approach here was to leverage. We had done 4 years of actually 5 years of small projects. They were dispersed. They were basically what was left of remaining NEPA that the Forest Service had. That there was not any NEPA. There were very little projects left that had NEPA coverage, and the types of projects we're doing is, kind of protecting in some ways Forest Service assets and communities at a relatively small scale. So we thought we knew that we were kind of like going back to the presentation on emergency authority. We knew that this was an emergency. By this time, not only had we seen what was RIM and Butte, but Dixie and Caldor further reinforced the fact we have in our region one of the few green forests left. So we thought we better get on this as soon as possible, and so we started a phase one, which we looked at what can we do now that's not too controversial, mostly ladder fuel work, and immediately provide some value. We know that it would take us longer to start to plan for canopy removal or commercial timber. So these were things like ladder fuel, mastication, ground fuel work, hand thinning, and prescribed fire. And then the phase two focus was to look at a much bigger area. Basically, it looks at all the non-wilderness national forests in that UMRA footprint, plus large boundary areas on either side. Okay, next slide. So the goal is, try to move through this. The goal is really to get a NEPA ready fuels treatment projects as soon as possible. So phase one turned out to be about 25,000 acres, and we're working right now on phase two, which is 250,000 acres. So when you talk to scale, it's basically three steps for us. Those small projects hit a few hundred to up to 1,000 acres, and then a 25,000 acre comprehensive plan that addressed an area, and then the 200,000 acre plan will likely end up with about 50 to 70,000 acres that we think are important to do some work in the next 10 years. We certainly aren't going to touch it all, and there is not enough funding to do that. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, this was mastication, hand thinning, fuel breaks, a little bit of meadow restoration, and prescribed burning implemented by the Forest Service. Next slide. So our goals here are to do about 4,000 acres per year on average. We really got going last year. The first sets of contracts were awarded in 2023. We've got 2 more we'll award this year. Thank you, CAL FIRE and SNC. That's what's helped us get to this stage. And we'll probably have enough funding now and in the queue to get at that 4,000 for the next couple of years, maybe 2.5 years. So we anticipate getting 4,000. This all depends upon contractors being able to achieve that. They say they can. We'll see how it goes. Next slide, please. So how did we get, I know this is way too busy. Just look at the acronyms in the second column. We wouldn't have gotten to where we're at if it wasn't for SNC on forest and watershed health programs and RFFCP funding got us to where we are on the planning. So it started out with that 25,000 acre plan. We used member funds. So county and member, the UMRA funding and SNC funding got us there. And then you can see, WCB has provided some funding, but if I look at what is going to be awarded, Andy, I hope things go through on the March SNC board meeting. And if they do, we probably have about 13 million in the queue to conduct work. But let's go to the next slide. This is what's in black is a 25,000 acre footprint. With this, we wanted to be in a contiguous area, and the stuff in these areas that are in green and yellow and kind of that yellow brown color are all areas that are in the queue. Either we've received the grants, or if we've applied for the grants, or we've done the pre-app and we're waiting to do the full app. So this is what we look at. I showed my board, and this is what we mean by landscape. We don't need to touch everything, but we need to touch a pretty large scale. This covers, that's 25,000 acres. So we've got in the range of 10,000, a pretty good chunk of it already in the queue to be done in the next few years, maybe 3 years, hopefully 3 to 4. Next slide, please. I'm gonna just go to the next slide, and I'll just talk about phase two. So this is the phase two footprint is the stuff in the cross shading. So this is pretty big. This is Forest Service property. You can see the green areas on the right side. Those are all wilderness, and we're not going to be doing any work in there. And so this is a much larger area. We're in progress, and UMRA is doing the NEPA work on behalf of the Forest Service. We're using getting their input, but we're doing it ourselves with a little bit of our money and some state grants. Next slide, please. I know I'm down to about half a minute left, so I think I've only got a couple of slides here. So how do we get from a 500-acre project to where we're at now? We had sort of a 5-year training period. We have flexible staffing levels, so we can staff up as we need to, and there's probably 13 or 14 people working during the implementation season, overseeing contracts. We go out to bid, we oversee the contracts, we manage the grants. We've done all the planning to get to that stage. We would love it if National Forest Foundation or anyone else. We don't need to do this work. We're happy with anyone doing this work. We're the planning's done, NEPA's done, CEQA's done for that first 25,000 acres, and that's what got us is this incremental planning that followed that training period, and having large landscape level plans. Next slide, please. This won't be any news to anybody here. What are the challenges? Getting that local support. Here, funding. We got to expand the sources for available funding. That third bullet, we've addressed some of that with, probably substantially address it with Blue Forest, which is working capital. We find that ground truthing the projects following completion of planning. Once you can do your planning, but you've got to get out there and you've got to flag the units. You've got to make sure that that these are constructible. And before you go to bid, you've got to have appropriate bid packages. We've overcome a number of Forest Service staffing issues. We got through phase one virtually with no permanent forest supervisor during the planning period, and no permanent district ranger. Their staff, things have settled down. The other thing is there's limited specialist resources. So what UMRA's done in our grants, we're basically doing it with input and oversight from their specialist staff and others. So UMRA is, since we're a public entity, we can accomplish the CEQA ourselves. So once the NEPA is done, we take care of the CEQA. And I think that I think that's the last slide. Yeah.
Great, thank you, Richard. Bella, I have a question for you related to timing. Are we still at the 11:45 cutoff time, or are we moving 5 minutes longer?
I think we can take 1 or 2 questions, but trying to stick generally around that 1 or 11:45 time.
You got it. All right, we'll move quick. Any questions from the team here? Okay, I have a quick question. So, Richard, this is a great project, and it's massive in scale. Have you budgeted for the maintenance of the project after all the implementation projects have taken place? And if so, or if not, what do you anticipate what that might be?
I anticipate the maintenance will occur outside any current grant opportunity. So what we have budgeted for is monitoring that will inform what you need to do for maintenance. So that we actually, once again, have to thank SNC and others and CAL FIRE, because we've incorporated monitoring in our grant applications. We want to have a robust monitoring program. We are also, so the way we've dealt with that particular thing is to ensure that at least the first touch of going back, whether that's fire, targeted grazing, or more, hand thinning, whatever, is included in the NEPA document. So we don't have to go back and redo NEPA and CEQA when, at least in the first iteration of maintenance.
Thank you, Richard. And my last question, since I don't see any other hands up, is to Anna. Anna, You mentioned in your slide deck that you or your team does quantifiable review of the impact of the investments. Can you explain exactly what that is? And do you do it internally, or do you hire outside groups to do that?
Yeah, so there's kind of two, I think, different maybe perspectives you could look at our impact analysis. One is more tied to what you just mentioned, Jonathan, of the impact on investments, perhaps. And I encourage everybody to check out Blue Forest's website. We have our annual impact report that summarizes the overall impact of all of the dollars that we have financed and implemented on the ground. So that's kind of the bird's eye view. And our team leads the quantification and the production of that. We're currently in the midst of finalizing our 2023 impact report, which should come out probably sometime in the late spring or early summer.
But
And then
I'm sorry if I didn't characterize my question. Is it quantifiable as it relates to the natural resources benefits, water, carbon, so on and so forth?
Yeah, totally.
And who does that?
That was the second aspect I was thinking about. So,
Okay.
So in terms of like looping in beneficiaries and bringing them to the table to engage with, yes, definitely. We work closely with some different partners in quantifying both the economic analysis as well as the ecological analysis. So that's kind of the marrying of those on the ground ecologic impacts and putting dollar amounts on what those impacts will be for a certain beneficiary. And we do lead a lot of that work, and we lead it alongside some partners as well. Like I mentioned, the World Resources Institute is a key partner of ours. And Matt, I see you went off mute if you want to add to that.
I can add just a couple other specific partners. We've worked really closely with the Center for Ecosystem Climate Solutions out of UC Merced. They have a data atlas that has been really helpful and is feeding into the regional resource kits and the work that the task force is putting together. So we expect to be partnering with them more in the future as well as groups like Pyrologics, if it's helpful to throw those names out there, Jonathan.
Great, thank you so much. Bella, I apologize, I'm 2.5 minutes over my time, but Jonathan, Zach, Bella, thank you very much for putting this panel together. You guys were, the panelists were fantastic. I thought it was a great discussion. Take care.
Thanks, Jonathan, and to panelists. I think, yeah, we're completed with our panels. We're going to have two kind of closing speakers and then just share a little bit about next steps for Scale. So what's coming up. So I'll turn it over to Zach to kind of, prep closing speakers.
Great. Thanks, Bella. And thank you, Jonathan Birdsong, for doing that last panel and moderating. Yeah, I just first off wanted to thank everybody for attending. This is my second Scale meeting. So sorry, Todd, that you may have a little bit more of a time and legacy on it than I do, but I'm just really amazed by kind of the creativity and the passion and the coordination that just gets highlighted from all the Scale speakers and then of course the attendees. And just really excited to see just how today's topics just kind of continue to be moved forward and discussed and co-developed and actualized into the future and the outcomes. So just to kind of provide a summary for today, I just want to introduce two individuals, Kat Perlman and Steve Walensky. So Kat, she is the Forest Conservation Program Manager at South Yuba River Citizens League. And they've been working explicitly as a project manager for the North Yuba Forest Partnership. And then with a kind of focus on partnership committees and communications with a background in wildlife management and biogeography, and has been working in the Central Sierra Nevada since 2020. And then the Sierra Institute, we are really privileged to have Steve on our staff working in the tribal training program. Many of you do know Steve, who he has been a 2-term supervisor in Calaveras County in the Central Sierras, and he is the founder of CHIPS, or the Calaveras Healthy Impact Product Solutions. And over the last 2 years, Steve's been working at the Sierra Institute and a tribal training program he first launched at CHIPS, including over 20 tribes. So I'm just going to turn it over to Kat.
Great. Thanks, Zach. Thanks for having me. And hi, everybody. Again, I'll introduce myself. My name is Kat Perlman, and I am the current Forest Program Conservation Manager at Circle, and as well as our North Yuba Project Manager. So one of my primary roles is really managing sort of the communications and the committee relationships on the North Yuba Forest Partnership. So yeah, to kind of close out today and just really kind of summarize what I've been hearing and taking away from this conversation is just to really hit back on how Jonathan kind of started the meeting, which was to review scale in the Sierra Institute and how things have moved and where there's been momentous growth versus where there's been not stagnation, but I guess slower growth and less apparent movement forward. And for me personally, coming to a collaborative discussion like this, one of the main takeaways is that this sort of gleaning of inspiration from other groups and other collaboratives where there's a lot of overlap. So I'm hearing a lot of just kind of shared challenges, shared experiences, shared process, shared opportunities even with other groups that are talking on here that the North Yuba Forest Partnership experiences every day. So just thinking a lot about sort of the adaptive process that was discussed early on from the North Coast Resource Partnership, a lot of similar experiences that I heard from Upper McCollum that Richard just shared on kind of this short versus long-term phasing of work. And then also, of course, just this repeated expression of how challenging it can be to have turnover, to have different people coming and going, to have this funding shifts from year to year. And this is the kind of stuff that with North Yuba, we deal with every day. And overall, our partnership on paper in a lot of ways has been really successful. We work with some of our partners are on this call, the North Forest National Forest Foundation and Blue Forest. And the North Yuba Partnership landscape is sort of the home of the first Forest Resilience Bond. So we've had a lot of innovation and we've had a lot of push from a lot of our different partners to move forward quickly and to make a lot of progress really fast. And we still have just immense challenges in front of us to get our landscape where we want it to be. And I think, as Richard said, we're one of the green forests remaining in this part of the Sierra. So there's a lot of tension and there's a lot of emotion behind the work we do together. And so I just want to speak to hearing from all of you guys. And I know that everyone on this call has to do sort of the grueling, repetitive kind of commitment to the small day-to-day tasks. And I think when I say inspiration, it's not necessarily this, always it's exciting and fun and, oh, we're networking and we're getting energy from each other, but it's also that commitment to learning these little tidbits that are similar but different. So I'm hearing a lot of things that I can, write down, come back to later, bring back to our partnership to talk about, figure out, oh, this group's doing it a little bit differently. How can we look into how that can inform how we move forward? And it can be boring. It can be redundant. It can be really, it can be a commitment. And so I think that despite it not necessarily looking like quick progress all the time, this sort of collaboration and the small things that we're doing differently and the little tidbits that I'm picking up from each of these groups that share today is where a lot of movement actually happens long term. As Jonathan said, I'll look back in 10 years on how much the North Yuba Partnership has changed, and there's going to be so much to look at. But getting really into the weeds as someone, for example, I work with our committees. I make sure that our committees are communicating. I make sure that we are all on the same page, and it's hard work, and it's encouraging to hear that it's a shared experience, but also that there's other ways that people are working through it. And so yes, thank you, Scale, for having these gatherings. Every time I attend, there's little things that I take away that like I say, I make notes of them. I don't know that I'm going to implement anything today or tomorrow. It's going to change the course of North Yuba's work, but there's definitely little threads that I like to make sure that I incorporate and bring to our table. And I think all of us are kind of doing the same. So that's what I've taken away today. And I appreciate the chance to be involved and to hear what everybody else is doing and how we're all moving forward.
Yeah, thank you so much for that insight. And right before I turn it over to Steve, just want to add one slightly large brief detail about Steve is that he also was the founding member of the Amador Calaveras Consensus Group, just to wrap it kind of back into some of the other talks that we've had. Steve, take it away.
Well, thanks, Zach, for outing me as the oldest guy in this meeting, but still tenacious and hanging in. I have Kat did such a great job of outlining a bunch of stuff. It leaves me with only random spare thoughts, but here's a few. The first thing is I'm really impressed. We started when we just started this scale thing. We listened to the Forest Service talk in acronyms. They could do whole paragraphs in just acronyms. I always thought that eventually the community input here would be that they would stop doing that and we'd all be talking the same language. But as it turns out, we all now have the ability to talk in acronyms, and we've demonstrated that very successfully during this meeting. There are so many other quick observations. When we started out, it was really a bunch of old guys, or, you know, we were on our way to old, and we now certainly have achieved it. But this meeting, maybe it's just the pictures and the, you know, the Zoom screen, but looks like there's a lot of new generation folks, and you are technically brilliant. You are articulate as hell. Your presentations are detailed and well organized, and it's a delight to be able to sit back and appreciate it. It also shows that you can teach old dogs new tricks, and I learn something new every time we meet together, and that's been wonderful. We started out sort of in the aftermath of the timber wars, and our main, you know, the dynamic in forest was trying to stop really bad stuff. But I can see through this meeting and others in scale that we've actually moved from trying to stop bad things in the forest to now we've got two things. One is we're trying to do good, and we're increasing our pace and scale in that. A lot of good restoration and stewardship work is taking place. It was only a pipe dream back then, and it's nice to see it expanding. At the same time, I know that we go through ups and downs in financial dealings. We've had some real thin times where there was nothing, and then we've had these gluts. It kind of is like, on the one hand, being in a snail race and then getting on Mr. Toad's Wild Ride in Disneyland. It's just crazy, our ups and downs in financing. So I was delighted to see Blue Forest in particular, but others doing innovations, expanding the funding possibilities, that there are many stakeholders and beneficiaries, and identifying them is pretty important as we try to sustain work when there is little in the way of funding sometime in the future, maybe sooner than we had hoped. But the other thing that keeps screaming to me is that we cannot rely just on donations and philanthropy and federal budgets and grants to keep this up. If we do not have some form of forest infrastructure, something to do with biomass and making it pay, we know we have the technology, we have the knowledge, we are certainly aware of all the possible applications and even new ones that are coming forward with great technological advance, but how do we get them on the ground? And will we be able to create the investments and the entrepreneurial zeal shown by Blue Forest and its work? Will we be able to direct at least some of that to infrastructure? And how will we get the private sector to engage in the kinds of ways that we have found back when we started? The idea of forest and water was almost novel. I spoke to a water agency gathering in which I suggested that there was a connection 15 years ago, and nearly got laughed out of the room. But today, just look at the conversations that we've had and the step up of water agencies, Yuba, Umbra. This is huge. This is so important, and that kind of connection can also be made with insurance companies that might be losing a whole lot of revenue. I guess there's only one left doing fire in California, but maybe State Farm would like to be a partner in this. There are so many other partnerships that we have yet to develop, but kudos to those of you who have broken through the idea that it's not just a small group of foresters and technicians that benefit. And this leads me to one other thing. The the idea that the communities of the Sierra, rural communities that have been left for dead economically after closure of mills, the idea that we need to involve people, not just because it's a good idea to be collaborative and inclusive, but that our very work depends on community and public support. And we're not going to heal our forests without healing the communities within them. And this gets me to a last point. We've approached this. It strikes me that when we first started out, we were doing whack-a-mole on individual specific issues. We got sidelined for a year on how dense we should replant a burned forest. You know, how many trees per acre? And then we had drought that killed everything we planted. And then we had, there was a great debate about woodpecker habitat. And the next thing we know, we've created through fire a massive amount of woodpecker habitat. But we hang ourselves up on narrow aspects of the environment through our disciplines and siloed expertise. Tribal history has 10,000 acres of really brilliant, when you think about it, stewardship of this landscape. Some of our work needs to get back to the point where those practices can reemerge and help lead us and guide us. Despite our history of genocide and the aftermath of it, tribal practice continues to be among us and needs to be recognized. And I'm grateful for those of you who mentioned that during the course of this. There's so much to learn, but it's both complicated and simple. The complication is we have to learn that it's not our disciplines or our land ownership or management that determines outcomes, but it is the integration of all things natural. It is the idea that all things nature are connected, and that if we don't respond in that fulsome way, we will continue to be victimized by the problems we've created over 200 years of poor stewardship and bad management in the aftermath of 10,000 years of good. Anyway, I wish I could talk for longer because there's so many wonderful things that happened in this that I'd love to recognize. But you all know you're good, so that's probably how I'll end.
Steve, Kat, great words to end this meeting. We'll give Bella 30 seconds to tell us about the next meeting, and then we'll say our goodbyes here. Bella?
Yeah, so just final kind of reminder, there's another meeting, 3 hours, similar format to this, but focused on workforce and employment at the end of February, so February 29th. And we will be sending out more reminder emails and such so that you can register for that meeting as well.
Bella, thank you. And to you all, thank you for taking time. There's lots of different things that you could be doing instead of this meeting. Thanks for your participation. I'm actually really heartened by the fact that there's a meeting of some 200 people in Sacramento to talk about biomass. Who would have thought that was going to happen even 5 years ago? So there's a robust meeting, which I know some of the folks who wanted to be here are attending. Let me end it there and just say again, thank you to the presenters, our folks who are coordinating panels. We appreciate it. Thank you all. Keep up the good work. See ya.
Thank you.